ahead and type into the chat box, David, we hear you, everything's cool. And that way I know that everything's set up properly. All right, one person hears me. How about everyone else who is with us here today? Loud and clear. Perfect. So as I said, we're going to actually start the webinar in, say, 3 to 4 minutes so that latecomers have a chance to show up. In the meantime, I'd be interested in hearing where y'all are from. So which is to say, when you're planning on taking the GMAT, have you taken it before, where you're coming from, where you heard about the webinar from. If there are specific things you'd like to talk about today, then I'd be happy to hear about them. I try to make these webinars as interactive as possible so that you gain the most from them. All right, so who here has taken the GMAT before? There should be, I think, about a dozen or so people on the webinar, and I see 2 to 3 messages in chat. So can everyone else hear me, or is it just a few people who can hear me? All right, cool. Cool. All right, what about everyone else? We have one person who's saying that I think it's a he, Enrique, is planning on taking the GMAT around July, August. How about everyone else? Is this your first time, or are you a retaker? What sort of schedule do you need? What sort of study plan are you looking for? So for the person who's taking it for the first time on the 28th, is that like in a week and a half? We have July, we have August, we have May, a crash course in a week and a half. That's tough. That's tough. Trying to meet deadlines. In April, all right, it's a decent spread. It's a decent spread. So from a crash course of a week and a half to people who are taking it in something around 5 months or so. A schedule that gets us a 700 score, that is the optimal thing, I agree. All right, cool. So that's a good bit of intro. It's also interesting for you to sort of look at the chat and see what your colleagues and friends are requesting. And I think with that, we will start the main event for today. So as said, my name is David. Pleasure to meet you. I'm a senior tutor at examPAL. I've been in the test prep business for years. And before we get started, just as a thank you to everyone who is here with us today, there is 25% off on all of our packages, which you can go on and check on the website after the webinar. And this is a common question on webinars. These webinars are recorded and sent out to you. So for those of you, I do, of course, recommend staying throughout the webinar because then you get to ask me questions in person at the end and throughout the webinar. But if for some reason something happens to your connection, don't worry about it. The webinar is recorded and will be sent out to you. Okay, so before we actually get into the study plan, we're going to do a little bit of a brief intro into what is the GMAT and how you should study for it. It seems like there's quite a few first-timers here today. This is especially important for you, but it is also important for all of the retakers out there. So first of all, you need to understand what is so hard about the GMAT, why people just don't like it so much. And number one is that there are many, many different ways to solve each and every single question in the GMAT. And honestly, this is also frustrating for me as a teacher because, you know, in test prep, in standard test prep, you're sitting in a class and there's a teacher in front of you, and he's teaching or she's teaching 30 people at the same time. And I somehow need to adapt all of these 10 different ways to each individual person. And do it while lecturing a class of 30 students. And this just doesn't work out. This doesn't work out, and this is why one-size-fits-all courses aren't worth it. The second part that is really, really hard about the GMAT and is really important for you and your studies to realize is that the biggest enemy on this test is not actually the difficulty of the question, it is time. So if you were to have, say, 10 to 15 minutes to solve each and every single one of the questions, and for most of you, it wouldn't even be 10 to 15 minutes, it would be even 5 minutes to solve each and every question, you could do it. But you don't, unfortunately. You have an average of approximately 2 minutes per question in the quant section and a little bit less than that in the verbal section. And the really, really hard part about the GMAT, the thing that you really need to focus in on in your studies is how can you solve the questions correctly, but also quickly? How can you find the method that works fastest for you? And binding these two together is basically the basics, the basis, as it were, of how you should plan your GMAT studying. So you should think to study smart. You should think to study efficiently. And this means that you don't want to study thousands and thousands and thousands of questions. This is not about rote practice. What happens if you just try to rote practice for the GMAT is you end up looking like this. Just a guy banging his head up against the wall who is not progressing as he would like to. And essentially, this is why we have this is why we built up examPAL as we built it up, and this is also how we recommend that you build up your study plan. So one thing that you need to do once you've sort of progressed beyond the basics of just learning the rules and learning the words and learning the vocab, learning how to approach questions, you need to sort of zoom out and learn yourself, as it were. So you need to observe yourself, and you need to see which of the methods to solve given questions works best for you and which does not. Which questions do you tend to make mistakes on? Which types of mistakes do you tend to make? And all of these together, when you bind them into one sort of cohesive study plan, this is the winning strategy. And someone towards the start mentioned that he wants the study plan that'll guarantee a 700. So this is it, essentially. This is it. And together, we like to call this, and it's also called this in the literature, cognitive flexibility. So cognitive flexibility means being able to choose the right tool for the right task and to implement it quickly and correctly. All right, so this is what you need to develop in studying for the GMAT. So just to say this one last time, it's not about the rules. It's not about the knowledge. It's not about practicing thousands and thousands of questions. It's about building up your cognitive flexibility. All right. And just to sort of give you an example of what I mean, I'd like to take a look at a single question, and I'd like for us to do it together. And so let me read it out. For every positive x and y, 3x plus 2y divided by x plus y is between 0 and 1, 1 and 1.5, 1.5 and 2, 2 and 3, or 3 and 4. All right. So what I want to do now is I want you guys to try and solve this question. And what's more interesting to me than the answer is how you think you should go about solving this question. And go ahead and type into chat. Just take like a minute or a minute and a half to do it. Go ahead and type into chat what you think the answer is and why you think that's the right answer, how you got to that answer. And, you know, this is a bit of an experiment. Let's see what you come up with. All right, so we have 3 different answers in chat, which is amazing, but I don't actually care that much about the answer. What I care more about is why you think that's the right answer. What is the tool that you think you should use in order to solve this question? What is the tool that is fastest for you, that is most clear for you? That's what I want to focus you in on, right? Because this is the most important part of building that perfect GMAT study plan. All right, and there are quite a few suggestions in chat now. So in addition to thinking for yourself, also take the time to read what your friends are saying in the chat. And there's a diversity of methods out there, and this makes sense because different people think differently, and you should really focus in on the methods that work best for you. All right, so let's go over 3 possible solutions to this question, and really highlight why these different solutions cater to different types of thinking. So solution number 1, and this is, let's call it textbook solution. This is maybe what you would be taught in your math class in high school or college, is to sort of manipulate the equations. So you can take the numerator and say if you add y to the numerator, then you have 3x plus 3y divided by x plus y, which equals 3. And this is sort of the right-hand side of the inequality that you're seeing. And if you subtract x from the numerator, then you get 2x plus 2y divided by x plus y, which is 2. And this is the left-hand side of the inequality that you're seeing. And therefore, we have rigorously proved mathematically that this expression for positive x and y is between 2 and 3. And so the answer is answer choice D. Now, some of you might be looking at this and saying, you know what, I would never have thought to answer the question this way. And actually, I think there's only one person in chat who suggested a similar method of solution, which is to break up the expression mathematically into two separate parts. And this makes sense because especially if you weren't sort of a math major or you're just not a math person in general, then this kind of method probably isn't going to be the one that works best for you, even though it's the one that you're sort of taught in class, as it were. All right, the second method, and this is the most common method to solve this question, and it's also the most common one in chat amongst you guys, is to just substitute numbers. So for example, if we take x equals y equals 1, then we would get that 3x plus 2y over x plus y equals 3 plus 2 over 1 plus 1. This is equals to 2.5. And since the expression we know has to equal, has to be in one of these ranges for every single choice of x and y, then we can eliminate A, we can eliminate B, we can eliminate C, we can eliminate E, and there's only one possible answer choice, which is D. And therefore, this must be the right answer. Now, we haven't actually proved that D is the right answer. So we don't know. I mean, if someone said, well, why? Why is it that D is the right answer? You'd be like, well, I mean, because I eliminated everything else. And point is that on the GMAT, that's good enough. That is 100% good enough. And in many, many of the questions on the GMAT, you're not actually going to be interested in rigorously solving them. You're going to be interested in eliminating all the answers that don't make sense at all and seeing what is left. And this is especially true for verbal. Say, for example, in sentence correction, that's the standard method for solving sentence correction. All right. A third solution approach that I want to showcase here is something that we like to call the logical approach. And this is sort of relies on a more fundamental understanding of a concept of weighted average in this case. And that's saying that, well, if you take y and you make y the smallest it can be, then your expression, so y is very, very close to 0. Then all you have on the numerator is basically 3x. And in the denominator, you just have x. This is 3x divided by x, which is 3. And you can do the same on the other way. If you make x very, very, very close to 0, then all you have is 2y divided by y, which is 2. And this is another more logical proof, but it's an actual proof that the answer choice is D. All right, and sort of just putting all three of these answer choices, one answer, rather solution approaches, one next to the other, hopefully you can see that they're fundamentally different in how they work. All right, so the precise approach, and these are the three categories that we tend to divide GMAT solution approaches into. The precise approach is essentially about manipulating equations. It's about understanding which rules you need to use. It's understanding how to take numbers and plug them into, how to take equations, how to take the numbers in the question and plug them in. You go through all of the math, you get to the answer, and you're done. All right. This always works. Unfortunately, it can take some time, especially if the math is a little bit involved. The second type of approach is the alternative approach. All right. And this approach is about how to get to the right answer without actually understanding why it's the right answer. And most often, this is some method of elimination, sort of like what we did now. We chose specific numbers, we eliminated everything else. There was just one solution, one answer choice that made sense, and therefore that was the correct answer. And the third type of approach, the logical approach, is a more sort of zoom out type of approach. It relies on understanding the fundamental logical principles behind the question. All right. And so again, this is not the main topic of today's webinar, but it is to show you that there are many, many different solution methods to every single question. And it's to emphasize again that in studying, what you should do is you should zoom in on those methods that work best for you. Cool. So on our platform, we do this in an AI-assisted approach. So first, like there's the interactive lessons. Unfortunately, learning all of this math and vocab and rules and so on can be boring. So we try to make it as interactive and as active as possible. Afterwards, there's the improvement phase. So this is everything I've been talking about so far. So this is zooming in and taking and pausing and taking the time to see what the main tool that you used was if you got the question right. If you made a mistake, what exactly was the reason that you made that mistake? And this really, really, really helps you to focus in. And for those of you who are retakers, there were a few people in chat who said they're taking the test again. They've taken it twice already. Then this is what you really need to do. You really need to zoom in on the delta, on the improvement, on what can you do differently. Because just doing the same thing again and again and again will get you the same result. It won't help you improve. And then there's the optimization stage. Like again, on our, you should do this yourself. On our platform, we sort of do the heavy lifting for you, and we suggest which of the approaches work best for you based on sort of what we've seen from all the other students and from your performance and so on. And there's some of the statistics behind the algorithm, some awards. We have great ratings, and we provide a guarantee, which is really important, especially for you retakers. And all of this stuff you can just check out on the website. Again, it's not the main topic for today. Okay, so now we're transitioning over to today's main topic, which is how to actually build that study plan. And essentially, I'm sort of going to preface this by saying that it's pretty much the same all around. And the only difference in study plans is how condensed they are. So basically, you're going to take your study plan and you're going to slot it into ideally somewhere between a month and a half to 2 months. If you have to shorten it to 1 month, if you want to increase it to 3 months, it's basically going to be the same plan, but it's going to be a little bit diluted, or it's going to be a little bit more condensed. And for those of you who want specific plans, because you're improving, because you need to focus on the quant or on the verbal, then you can ask me questions towards the end, or you can just log on and talk to us on chat, because we have 24/7 support with tutors. All right, so let's jump right in. So let's look at our example GMAT test taker, Mr. John Doe. Now, John here is taking the GMAT for the first time, as many of you are. And he has a 9-to-5 job, which I'm assuming that many of you also have, especially as the GMAT business schools usually require work experience. Most of you are probably working. Honestly, in today's economy, it's probably not a 9-to-5. It's more like a 9-to-6 or a 9-to-7. That's just how things are nowadays. And hopefully for most of you, it's going to be relatively strong English skills. And if it's not, then we'll talk about what you need to do about it. So this is sort of the standard prototype GMAT test taker, and this is the schedule that we're going to start off with. So the question you might want to ask yourself is, how much time will you need? All right, how much time should you put into your GMAT prep? How many hours should you spend? An hour spent is much more useful of a metric than days spent. So we usually recommend about 100 to 120 hours. This includes learning all of the material, practicing, refining, taking the CATs. We'll get a bit into more detail a bit later on. With an extra 30 hours for non-native speakers. So usually if a student comes to us who isn't a native English speaker and doesn't have a very high quality of English, then we recommend that they take the first month of studying just to work on English. Don't even bother with the math yet. Just work on reading. It's amazing how much increasing your reading speed in English increases your overall proficiency in the exam, just reading. And this boils down for most people to something like 6 to 8 weeks, which is what we recommend. So we recommend a medium intensity schedule. So this can be practicing every day. It can also be slotting the majority of time during the weekend in just an hour to an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours per day during the week. But end of the day, if you do a medium intensity scheduling, which is what we recommend, then it takes 6 to 8 weeks to do the 100 to 120 hours. And let's get into a bit of detail. So how do you go about partitioning your time in this 2-month plan, in this sort of 6 to 8 week thing? So the first thing you want to do is basically learn the material. All right, this shouldn't come as a surprise. 1 second, please. Is learn the material. And so again, if you're doing homeschooling, then you'll need to make a list of all of the sort of various GMAT topics that are out there. We, of course, don't recommend that you do this. Even if you're studying with the official guide, which is also something that we don't recommend, then you'll need to start by making a list of all the GMAT topics that you need to learn. This is especially important for math, because in math, there's a variety of topics. In verbal, it's less about making a list of all the GMAT topics. It's more about reading and getting that practice in solving questions and understanding what the questions are all about. And it's a little bit about vocabulary. Usually we recommend a 2-day mini schedule for each of the topics. The schedule looks as follows. So day 1 is to just learn the material, review it. On our course website, we have it sort of laid out in a strategic manner, in a very easy to use manner. And afterwards, make the summary of the material and make a list of practical tips. And this is really important. You're going to make a list of all the things that you actually want to remember. All right. So, for example, classic things to make flashcards out of are, say, the Pythagorean triplets. Hopefully, maybe you remember this from high school, but in a right angle triangle. So you know that the square of one of the legs of the length of one of the legs plus the square of the length of the other leg is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. And there's specific triplets that reflect this, such as 3, 4, 5. And we're not going to go into too much detail now, but this is something classical that is worth making a flashcard out of. Another thing that is worth making a flashcard out of might be rules of exponents. All the algebra of a to the power of x times a to the power of y is equal to a to the power of x plus y. And which specific things you need to memorize, which specific tips you want to write down in your list, really depends on where you're at. So again, here comes the personalization aspect of the GMAT. So it's not going to help you to just take a big book of everything, which is going to be hundreds and hundreds of pages, and try to memorize all of it. Rather, what you need to do is you need to figure out those things that you're weak at and memorize those. And inside this practical tips list should also be a practical strategies list. So for example, we just looked at a question a few minutes ago, and we showed 3 different solution approaches for that specific question. So these different types of strategies, which is to say strategy of trying numbers, and inside the strategy of trying numbers, you're gonna want to write for yourself, be careful about 0, and maybe try out 1 because it's an easy number. You're gonna maybe want to write down for yourself specific sub strategies that you have found that make using numbers much easier for you to understand. With respect to manipulating equations, you might want to write down specific equalities or identities that are very useful to remember. So the classic one is, say, a squared minus b squared equals a plus b multiplied by a minus b. And again, if you don't really remember these identities that I'm talking about now, no problem. Like, go ahead, you need to study it. And we've laid it out in a course for you, and you can also homeschool it. But you really do need to make this sort of practical list. Okay. After that, once you have that, then you need to apply it. All right. And so the first day, you're sort of studying all of the stuff. And the second day, you need to actually solve subject-related questions. And most important part of solving questions isn't just to solve them and to see if your answer is correct. It is to debug your process. And sort of, I just want to go up to this slide here. And so this is how we do it on our website. And again, this is how we recommend that you do it in general. So if you got a question wrong, and you don't have to do this for every question, but we do recommend that you do it in batches of 5 to 10 questions. So just solve 5 to 10 questions and then take the time to debug them. Ask yourself, what did the wrong answers look like? If you selected a wrong answer, why did you select a wrong answer? What was the reason for your mistake? If you got it right, did you get it right quickly? Did you get it right after banging your head against it for minutes and minutes and minutes? So was there a faster way to have gotten it correct? And especially if you're using an official resource, then try looking for different types of solution approaches to that question. And this is sort of what's going to give you a leg up in the game in the long run. Okay, moving on. I believe we were here. Yes. So review mistakes, make a mistake list, update your tip list, and with respect to what we've said so far. And this is the majority of days 1 to 47. This is the majority of your GMAT spending time, about 2/3 of the time that you're going to be studying the GMAT. So that's a topic every 2 days. Daily reading and vocabulary. I've talked about this briefly. I put it here again because it's really important to emphasize. You want to read every day. You want to read every day, and not just read anything, but we have a list of suggested reading sources on our website. But basically, you want to read academic style writing. Okay, it doesn't have to be like a full-out academic paper, but it should be something that's relatively high quality, say like The Economist or The Times, National Geographic, something that'll just get you into the headspace of what GMAT reading looks like. And this is to get used to it, and it's also, as mentioned, to increase your reading speed. And vocab routine is honestly, it's important mostly if you have sort of a middle level vocabulary. If your vocabulary is decent, you probably won't have to put too much time into it. And honestly, it's usually less important. More important is the comprehension part. So inferring meaning from the text and not necessarily specific words. And don't forget to take a day off a week. So there was a person here who said that they have a week and a half left, I believe, before the exam. And that's crazy. That's like, honestly, that's extremely hard to do. I sincerely hope that you're either well into your study routine, or you're just naturally very, very good at this, because a week and a half isn't going to be enough. But for people who are saying they need to take the exam in April, and we're going to talk about the 30-day study schedule in a bit. April is doable, but April is hard. April is relatively close. Even for those of you who said that your planned exam date is in May or in June, then you still should take a day off a week. So don't kill yourself on the way to the GMAT. That just causes mental exhaustion. You end up getting to the exam tired. You don't retain the information. It doesn't work out. It doesn't help. So do take that day off. Last 2 days, as always, should be unscheduled. Leave yourself a bit of buffer time for stuff to go wrong, because stuff always goes wrong. And then this is sort of, once you've gone past all of the studying and all of the initial planning, you're at basically the essential review stage. All right. And what you do in the review stage, the most important part of the stage, is taking the CATs, taking the official practice exams. Okay. And let's just skip a few slides here so we can see everything together. And practice exams is a big topic to talk about. Right. So most people, when they take a practice exam, the only thing they do with a practice exam is they try to assess what their current score level is. And this is the wrong way to go about practice exams. The practice exams are first and foremost general rehearsals for the actual GMAT. So when you do a practice CAT, you want to do it in one sitting. You want to do it preferably at the same time of day as your real exam. You want to do it with the exact same breaks as the real exam. You want to test your timing on it. And really the reason for all of this is that you want to test all of your various strategies, sort of the big picture strategies, and not just your ability to solve questions. And your big picture strategies are which types of questions should you skip? How is your timing overall? Can you maintain focus for such a long period of time? Should you do the verbal section first or the quant section first? All of these questions you need to answer within the scope of the practice test. And that is why it is so important that you do the practice exam as similarly as possible to the actual GMAT. Now, once you've done that, you also need to take the time to analyze the results of the practice exam. So again, the practice exam isn't just about what is your current score level, though that is of course important. It's also about which types of questions did you get wrong? Were there questions that you got sucked into? All these sorts of things you need to understand, because this helps you focus in the remainder of your studies. So that's the practice exams in general. The general point of review is basically to sort of help condense, I guess, everything you've been doing so far. All right, so you've been studying by this point for a month and a half. You should have a good notion of which topics you're stronger with, which topics you're weaker with. You should have your practical tips list with your strategies list and your sub-strategies list. You should have a list of types of questions and types of wrong answer choices. All of this stuff that you've been building up over the course of your GMAT studies. So review this and split it up however you like. Via topics or via something else, supplement that with your practice exams, and this is the right way to review for the GMAT. This is how you should review for the GMAT. I think someone was typing a question earlier. Did you? You're. By the way, this is meant to be sort of somewhere between me lecturing and you asking questions. Sort of. This is meant to be as interactive as possible. And so do feel free to write questions in chat along the way, and I'll do my best to integrate the answers into the webinar. And of course, I'll address the remaining questions at the end of the webinar in the Q&A session. Cool. So this is the main sort of study plan that we recommend for pretty much the generic test taker. Sort of 6 to 8 weeks. Somewhere between 100 to 120 hours overall, approximately 15 hours a week. Take somewhere around 2/3 of the time, 3/4 of the time to just learn all of the material. The remainder of the time take to review and use your CATs as general rehearsals and not just as tools to gauge your current score ability. Okay, so I think here we're transitioning into the 1-month plan, if I remember correctly. Oh, and of course the last day, this is really important to say. So earlier I said take a day off a week. So the last day, the day before the exam, ideally you won't do any work at all. And the right way to think of this is that you're a GMAT athlete, you're a star athlete. The day before your big sporting event, which is the GMAT exam, you don't want to kill yourself the day before your big sporting event, all right? You want to sort of maybe do a few warm-ups, solve a few questions, do a last-minute review, something like that. At most, say 3 to 4 hours of work on the last day. But generally speaking, the last day before your exam should basically look like what these guys are doing here in the picture, chilling out, having a good time, so that when you come to the exam on exam day, you're fresh and you're relaxed and you're super focused, and you're calm. You're calm because you don't want to be stressed out. This is, I'll get to this, the questions in a second. We're at a pause point in a second here. So this is a suggested week in our generic GMAT John Doe study plan, who is at the office every day from say 9 to 5 or so, and also has other stuff going on like the gym or possibly friends. Usually he slots, we suggest slotting something in the morning, which is easy to do in the morning. So something short term. This can be flashcard work. It can be vocab work. It could be maybe reading, or you can put a reading before you go to bed at night. And then every day he has his evening session where he divides it into review and practice and goes over a specific topic every day or two, and leaves the weekend off or for a general review of that specific week. Cool. So before moving on, and we're going to talk a little bit about retakers, and then we're going to talk about how to condense this study plan into either a month or why and when you should expand it out into 3 months. So I'm going to take a few minutes to answer questions if there are questions at this point. So starting, I think, with Abdul, who was the first one. How many number of questions are typical on the exam? So it's not typical. You know exactly how many questions are in each section of the exam. If I remember the numbers correctly, it's 31 in quant and 36 in verbal. We have a blog on the subject. Please check us out. And you can just Google this very, very easily. How many tests should we appear before GMAT generally? Do you mean how many times do you need to take the GMAT before you get the score you want? Hopefully you only need to take it once. Most people usually end up taking it 2 to 3 times, and some unfortunately take more. Is there a schedule for those who do not have a 9 to 5, for example, those who work part-time? So basically, it comes down to doing the hours. So we recommend 100 to 120 hours spread out over a month and a half to 2 months. And this is because this, in our experience, is the amount of time it takes you to absorb the material without forgetting the material. So essentially, you can take the schedule and you can sort of erase all of the work days and you can put in study days instead. For some people, it might take longer. So if you have more time, then you should just devote that time to the things that you don't know so well. Next question. I'm taking the test in a week and a half, but I don't work a 9 to 5. How many hours should I spend studying per day? Honestly, a week and a half is not enough. What you're going to have to do, what I recommend for you to do, and this is not a standard study plan, this is just because you have a week and a half, it's to take a practice cat, to start off with a practice cat. If you're, say, I don't know, 100 or more points away from your target goal, then it's just not going to work. Delay the GMAT. If you're relatively close to it, then you need to cherry pick. You need to pick the low-hanging fruits, which is to say, see which sections you can improve the quickest to get the most improvement. You're not doing a standard GMAT studying. You're doing how can I improve the fastest in a week and a half? Something totally different. And feel free to contact us on chat, and we'll help you out with this later on. Next, what is the target score for the study plan? So study plans don't have a target score. Study plan is how you should structure your time so as to maximize your personal score. If you want like a specific recommendation for I am at this current score, I would like to get to this current score, how, and I have this amount of time, what should I focus on? Then we can talk about it. The general answer to that is it depends on your own strengths and weaknesses. So what I've really been emphasizing throughout this webinar is that one size fits all GMAT courses and GMAT approaches do not work. Different students have different strengths, different weaknesses, and that is what you need to focus on, both in terms of specifically which sections to study and also in terms of which strategies to focus on, and how to overall manage your time. And again, if you want more specific advice, please contact us on chat and we'll be happy to help you. I've given GMAT last July. In the practice, I was getting 750, but in the real GMAT, I got a 560. That's a huge difference. Okay, a 200-point difference between the practice exam and the real exam is not normal. It's indicative that something was really, really wrong, and we'll need to talk about it to figure out why. Okay, and I want to pause here. I want to go back to the webinar, and we'll have more time for questions later on. So this was sort of the interim pause in the middle of the webinar to answer all of y'all's questions. Okay, so how about retakers? How about people who have taken the exam before? They've done the best. They followed the 100 to 120 hour study schedule. They spread it out over a month and a half. They did all the work writing the practical tips list, the strategy list, all of the various lists that we recommend, and they still didn't get the score that they wanted. So first of all, rule number one is don't do the same thing that you did last time. If you're going to repeat exactly the same strategy, exactly the same study plan that you tried last time, most likely you're going to have an incremental increase. So if all you needed is another maybe 20 points, then you know what, maybe it's good enough for you. But usually people are looking to get from somewhere in the 600s to somewhere in the 700s, or somewhere in the 500s to somewhere in the 600s. They're looking for a big change. They're looking for 50-point change, 100-point change, maybe even more. And you really need to change up your game if this is what you're doing. And this is why we usually recommend for retakers to start off by repeating the fundamentals. So if you got, say, a 650 and you need a 720, then don't just go to the 700 level questions and solve them. The reason that you got a 650 is likely because some of your fundamentals are off. There are rules that you don't know well enough. There are traps that you don't recognize well enough. And so what you should do is you should start from the start. You should repeat everything. And when you're going over it for the second time, you'll notice all sorts of things that you didn't notice the first time around. And this is really, really important, excuse me, for each and every single retaker out there. Other than that, you really need to hone in on learning from your mistakes. So one sort of exception to the 2-month study plan is if you're a retaker and you already know most of the material and you just need to improve a little bit. So we're not talking about a massive improvement here. We're talking about, say, 20 to 50 point improvement. Then you can probably do that in a month, hopefully, with the correct guidance and with, the correct efficient study plan. You can probably do it in a short amount of time, but it really requires you to focus in your studying. So if you have prior knowledge of what you know and what you don't know, then this is what you should base your study plan on. This is really important to say. These are the 3 types of mistakes listed here that we generally divide mistakes into. So when you're debugging your own work, this is also how we recommend you sort of categorize your own mistakes. So mistake type number 1 is you just didn't know the material. So this could be, say, a vocabulary or a grammar rule that you didn't know. This could be that you didn't quite understand what an inference question means on reading comprehension. And in math, this is obvious. This is you just didn't know the rule, you didn't understand the question. And this sort of mistake means that you need to go back and review the fundamental material. This means that you need to go back to the notes or to the course that you're studying or to the video or to whatever it is, and to just sit down and learn the things that you didn't know, and maybe make flashcards out of it, do whatever you want. The second type of mistake, and this usually comes along later on in the process of studying, is the silly mistake, which is to say you didn't notice a detail in the question. So it said only positive integers and you missed the word positive. Or you were doing calculations and instead of a plus, you wrote a minus. All these types of things, and sometimes even you answered the wrong question. You have no idea how frequently this happens, and it's very frustrating when it does happen. So this type of mistake relates to focus, relates to really taking the time to read the question again before hitting the next button, to take the time to write clearly on your scratch pad and not messily. And all these types of things, they're not actually about learning the material, they're about how you apply your concentration and energy to the questions. And this is a different type of mistake and therefore requires a different strategy to solve. And the last category of mistake is that you just use the wrong approach. So if, again, we hark back to the first question that we went over in this webinar today, then we showed 3 different solution approaches, fundamentally different strategies for solving that question. And very possibly you'll encounter along the way questions that you went about trying to, say, pick numbers when there was a much, much easier logical strategy. Or you went about trying to do all the hard equation work when there was a much, much easier way to maybe use numbers. And this type of mistake is, again, it's something that happens towards the end, but is especially important for retakers. It's when you're going over your material, it's take the time to ask yourself, could I have answered this question faster? Was there a better way to answer it? All right, so all of this goes into how to build a study schedule if you're a retaker. And again, we're going to be sending this webinar to all of you, so you can just sort of screenshot it to yourself afterwards and print it out or whatever. Okay, cool. So 30 days. So should you take the GMAT? Should you spend only 30 days studying for the GMAT? The general answer is no, because you're going to be looking like this if you do. And the main exception to that is what I talked about earlier about retakers. Who have sort of done part of the way, but they're still climbing up to the mountain. And so they have like a shorter journey to go. And in their case, it's cool to do a 30-day study plan. Now, in general, condensing everything into 30 days isn't different from the original plan. It's still going to be daily study. It's still going to be 1 day off a week. It's still going to be the same. We recommend 100 to 120 hours. It's just going to be in a much shorter time period. So you're going to, instead of spreading out your mini schedules into 2 days, you're going to want to do it all in one day. So you're, for example, going to want to take the morning to learn the material, or if you're only studying, then you can take whenever you wake up to review the material, then take a break, take your second study session in the same day to solve questions, to make mistakes, and this sort of helps condense everything from 2 months into 1 month. And don't forget to read. Don't forget the reading, even if you do have a limited amount of time. And then when you get towards the end of the 30-day plan, then it's pretty much the same thing as before. So you're going to want to review all of the various lists that you made so far, and you're going to want to go over the practice exams. And all of the caveats and all of the sort of highlights I said about the practice exams are relevant for the 1 month study plan as well. So take it as a general rehearsal for the exam, and make sure to debug it and not just to look at your final score. On day 29, take a break, and day 30, go take that exam. Okay, and this is sort of a sample schedule. The main difference between this schedule and the one before is that this one is much more condensed. So except for working at the office, pretty much every single moment of free time is dedicated to learning. And if you're not doing a day job along with this, then you won't have the office, but you will have other things in there. And I suppose this is important saying the reason that we generally don't recommend a super intense program of GMAT studying is because for most people, all that happens is that they burn out. They try to cram too much information into a single amount of time. You work too many hours a day. And you can really see for people who say are taking 3 to 4 to 5 CATs, and a CAT is a practice exam. They're taking a practice exam every day, for example. You can see that by the third or the fourth, their scores start going down and not up. And the reason for this is that you're just mentally tired. And this is usually the reason you don't want to do this in 30 days. You just get mentally tired from all of this. If you don't have a choice, of course, you don't have a choice. And the last sort of type of approach that we recommend is, or rather that most people ask about, is a longer approach, especially for those of you who are taking the exam in the summer. So there's really two types of people who are looking for a long type of approach to the GMAT study. Person number one is someone who isn't a native English speaker, and therefore needs a lot more time in order to prep for the English part of the exam. And person number two is someone who is extremely busy. Now, the reason we usually recommend against a 90-day study schedule is because you forget. So even for those of you who are taking the exam, and I'll get to the questions in chat in a moment. I just sort of, we're getting close to the Q&A section, and I think I'll just answer the remaining questions there. So even if you are taking the exam in the summer, and your exam date is July or August, I'm not sure I would recommend that you start studying for it now. In fact, I probably wouldn't. I would recommend that you start reading now just to build up your reading skill. But in general, I would wait for that 2 to 2.5 month maybe point before the exam, since you have the time to start studying. And the reason for this is, as I said before, that you just don't want to forget things. You don't want to start studying, I don't know, integers now, and then when you're at the review point in 3 months, you'll realize that you've forgotten everything that you ever knew. And compare this to taking a course in college. So, you know, when you get to the exam at the end, there's a good chance that you don't remember what you did at the beginning of the semester, and you need to learn it all again. So if you do have 3 months, then really, it's, again, as mentioned, it's basically the same study schedule, but it's basically spread out. So you take 1 day to do the studying of the fundamental material, a second day to practice, a third day to debug all of your questions and review them. It should be, of course, a 3-day topic mini schedule, not a 1-day topic mini schedule. But it's the same basic idea because you need to go through the same steps in order to get to that goal. And then towards the end, you have the same. You have the review, you have the practice test, you have everything you want to do in them. And then you have the last day and the test day. All right, a few additional tips, and then we're going to go into the Q&A itself. So tip number one, silence is golden. I assume that all of you know personally how addicting your cell phone can be. So please try. This obviously isn't always possible, but when studying for the GMAT, when you need those periods of intense focus, to just take your phone, put it in a drawer, put it on silent. And this is 1,000% more important for the actual CAT. So when you're taking a practice exam, I want you to forbid yourself from using your phone as harshly as possible. So if possible, literally turn off your phone while you're doing the practice exam. Because you really need to use that practice exam as a general rehearsal so you don't come in surprised to test it. All right, tip number 2 is if you have trouble grasping something, then there's really sort of, we suggest 2 types of approaches. Approach number 1 is if it's a small thing, then don't worry about it. And this is when you're studying the material, of course. If it's something small, there's just a specific type of question that you don't understand, a specific small rule, you can push it out to review. You shouldn't waste time on it during that period. If it's something fundamental, so if you're looking at a question that's talking about remainders and you just don't understand what on earth a remainder is and how to use it or how they used it to solve the question, then you shouldn't push it off to the side. You should take the time to study it. And along with this, it's not written here, but I would like to say that many people have problems with the geometry sections of the GMAT. And it's important to understand that geometry is, on the one hand, a very small section of the exam. So you're probably going to see, say, somewhere between 3 to 5 questions in geometry on your exam, maybe even a bit less. And on the other hand, it takes quite a while to go through all of the material and to learn it. So for those of you who are very, very pressed for time and who don't need a 700 score, I would consider skipping geometry altogether. This, of course, really depends on your personal situation in terms of what score you need, how much time you have, and so on and so forth. If you see that you're having trouble with geometry, then you should feel relatively okay to push it to the side and say, you know what, I'm going to focus in on algebra instead, because it's so much more important. The next tip is something that we've been talking about throughout the entire webinar, which is that all of your mistakes are opportunities. They're actually much, much more than opportunities. It is 100% necessary to use your mistakes in order to improve. This is sort of a standard tip for life, I guess, but it's all it's true for the GMAT as well. 8 hours of sleep, regular exercise. And the last tip I want to put here is that you need to be optimistic. So you need to have the energy and the motivation, but you also need to be realistic. And I have students come to me and they want like an improvement of 100 or 150 points or something that is really, really hard to do. And they don't realize how much time and effort needs to go into that. So when you're looking at the amount of improvement that you need or at the actual score that you want to get to, be realistic when building your study schedule. So don't overplan and don't think that things will be super easy for you unless you're very, very good at them. And I think that finishes the webinar for today. I'm going to leave this up here. This is the same slide that we showed at the beginning. This is for all of you here with us today. You're welcome to a 25% off discount. The rest of the time is open to questions. So if anyone has a specific question, then please feel free to ask and I'll be around to answer them. So there are a few questions already on the board, so let's go over them. I think the last question, oh yeah, this is the next one. I'm getting 710 in my official GMAT mocks and my target is 760. My test is on the 10th of May. Okay, so it's about 2 months. What should be my approach? So you're at the 700 mark, so you're already very, very good with the material. To answer your question, I'd need to see a quant verbal breakdown, and I'd need to talk to you quite a bit about what specific areas, sort of what types of questions you're missing. So are your mistakes silly mistakes? And usually at the 700 level, silly mistakes are the rule, unfortunately, because you just know the material, so you don't make any other type of mistake. And then there's a whole discussion about timing. So is your time management correct or not, and so on and so forth. You have a Q50 and a V34. So quant's going to be really hard to improve. Quant, you're at the point where you need perfection. So basically for quant with you, it's mostly going to be just practice, and practice the esoteric, the 700 level questions, sort of so you understand, so you can see every single type of question that you might encounter on the GMAT beforehand, ideally. A V34 is indicative of quite a lot of room to work, and contact us in person and we'll sort of help you build a specific plan for verbal. But ideally, you would focus your time on finding out what's wrong with verbal and strategically planning how to overcome it, and just practicing a ton in quant so that you recognize those questions you didn't know before. Okay, next question. I've already been studying for 2 months, and I think I need another 45 days to hit the target score. Is it advisable? So if you're not where you need to be now, then I guess there's 2 options. I don't know if this is user 1-1. So I don't know if you already have a GMAT test date or not. I think one thing to consider is whether you want to take an exam and just sort of see how it is, because you've already been studying for 2 months, which is a decent amount of time. If you want to sort of keep improving, then certainly do it, but build a plan for the 45 days based on everything we've said so far. So consider yourself a retaker if you like. So if you've been going for 2 months, I'm assuming you've covered most, if not all, of the material you'll actually need. So think of yourself as a test retaker and pause. Just take a day or two to pause and review all of the things that you know and all the things that you don't know. And then moving forward, because you have another month and a half to go, think of how you can maximize that time. So how can you sort of cater to your strengths, mainly in terms of strategies, and how can you manage your weaknesses in terms of traps and mistakes? How can you avoid making mistakes? Okay, next question. Will I be sharing these slides? Yes, this webinar is recorded and it will be sent out to all of you. And as mentioned, you can always, I think it's going to be on YouTube afterwards. You can always just pause the YouTube video, take a screenshot, and so on and so forth. What is the rationale behind reading and what to read and how much? So there's a few rationales behind reading. I think I discussed them before. I'll discuss them now again. First of all, you want to increase your reading speed. So a lot of people have time on the GMAT, and time on the GMAT, having time problems on the GMAT is a result, well, of quite a few things, I guess. But one main thing is how quickly you read and understand the question, especially in complex word problems, or for example, critical reasoning is a classic example of this. If you're looking at a critical reasoning question and it takes you a long, long time to just figure out the logic behind what you're reading, then you're not going to have enough time to finish the verbal section properly. And reading helps you build up your mental muscles, as it were. It helps you get the practice in, and this is why it's important to actively read and to read academic style articles. So don't just like read a novel, but when you're reading, think that you're reading a reading comprehension passage and take the time to think about it. What is the author trying to say? What is the author's main message? And so on and so forth. And this is why you should read. What you should read, please go on to our website, check out the reading comprehension section. In there, it has a list of recommendations of things to read. How to, I'm assuming how to see if you're improving in reading, you'll just figure it out as you go along. You'll find that you're getting more comfortable taking less time and so on and so forth. Next, is there such a thing as studying for too many months? Yes, 100%. I addressed this before. Studying for too many months happens either when you start to forget what happened at the start. So actually, you're exactly the person I think I was aiming this towards. If your test date is in August and you started studying about a month ago, then I can almost guarantee that by the time you get to August, you're not going to remember what you started doing in February. This, of course, depends on you. It depends on your memory. But in general, I would recommend that the only thing you do now is sort of either brush up on the basics. So, for example, practice doing basic algebra things, practice reading, practice vocabulary, sort of just the really basic types of muscles. And start seriously studying for the GMAT, which is to say dedicating somewhere around 15 hours a week, approximately 2 months before test date. And since you have the time, then 3 months before test date. And until that period, don't think of yourself as seriously studying for the GMAT. Think of yourself as sort of, let's say, building up the basics so you can study. That's the general recommendation. For more personal advice, please talk to us on chat. Oh, the guy who had a 750 to a 560. So honestly, that's really, really surprising. There's usually two scenarios for someone who has a 200-point difference. 200 points is crazy. To be honest, 200, and especially 750. 750 is a really, really hard score to get. So if you were getting 750 consistently on your CATs, without cheating, without pausing, without asking help from friends, this was the first time you had seen the questions, you were legit doing the exam and getting a 750, and then you got a 560 on test day, then I would put quite a large sum of money, I guess, on the bet that you just had a really bad test day. You were super sick that day. You were super stressed out. It's something psychological going on behind the scenes. More likely is that it's a combination. So the 750s weren't like done exactly in a legit fashion, let's say. So you spread out the quant and verbal section, you paused in the middle, you had seen some of the questions before, something like that. And then on test day, you were stressed out and you did a bit worse. But 200 points, there's no sort of natural explanation. Something fishy is going on there. And so you can debug that by yourself or ask us for help. What basics should be started with as foundational if this is your first time? I have a year or more. Wow, dude, a year. So I guess I would just recommend to create a free account on our website and check out all of the different sections there. We've basically done all of the homework for you. So you can just go, you can create a free account. There's no pressure. You can see which sections are there. You can watch a few videos and get a feel for the types of things you need to know. You can, if you really want, you can purchase the official guide to the GMAT and sort of go through it, or look on the MBA's website to see what types of material you should be learning. You shouldn't, start studying now unless your math is very, very bad or your English is very, very bad. And in both cases, the type of studying you should do is sort of like what I mentioned before, is just building up the basics. So this isn't GMAT studying. This is sort of like pre-GMAT studying. This is reading and vocab work to build up your English, or this is sort of, let's just basically play around with equations and practice solving equations so that when I have to actually do them on the GMAT, I'll know what I'm doing. So that's the only thing I would recommend doing a year before the exam. To the guy who had the 750 and 560, sure, send us the ESR. Talk to us on chat. We'll help you out. Okay, cool. Any more questions? For the reading comprehension, please check out our website. We have a list of material in the reading comprehension section there. So ask us on chat. If you couldn't find it, ask us via, there's like a little chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. Just ask us, and customer support or one of the tutors will help you out. Any more questions? Okay, so it appears we're at the thank you stage. So thank you all very, very much for being here today. I hope that this has been a help to you. Again, my goal for today was to give you the basic tools for how to study for the GMAT in general. This is whether you study with us or whether you study with anyone else. I, of course, recommend studying with us because we put a ton of effort into perfecting our program and making it the best out there. And also, we've talked quite a bit about how to build a generic study plan. And it's important to realize that this is generic. So if you want specific information, specific details, do contact us on chat. We'll help you out. Yeah, this webinar will be recorded and sent out to you in the coming days. And I think that's all for today. So have a great GMAT studying period and a good evening, and hope to see you again.